So now, here I am retired, just doing art, gardening, and I feel really blessed, it's like always to remind people what a special life we live here. I mean, we are very, very privileged to be where we are in the world and have what we have, and even for the problems we have here now, some of it is depressing. And how do we, start to resolve like societal problems? I think that's something that preys on me quite a bit, the homelessness and people like just housing, or Maslow's hierarchy. I don't know if you know what that is, but like, you need these certain things. You need your basic needs met, food, shelter, water, but unconditional love and things like that. And you see homeless people, and especially some of the younger people, and a lot. I just think what brought them to this place. I just think there's this sort of underlying thing in American society where these kids are going without this support that makes them end up as these nomads. Maybe some of them it is completely by choice and whatnot, but I think a lot of it is because of trauma and their family lack of basic needs. So sometimes that preys on me quite a bit. Like, how do we as a society, and not that I feel like I'm doing my fair share either to, just keeping my own together, and feel so lucky that my kids have ended up as they have, in stable situations and in a place to go and stuff like that. Sometimes I do think about moving, like to be closer to the kids or back to a place I lived before, and it's like, well, this is my life. I know it's like, although I've been thinking about this a lot the past 6 months or something. Like, throughout my life, I've always had like kind of this idea of something that came next, what I was going to do, like for many years, like, more than 30 plus years or something. And there was always this like that in the back of my head, I'm going back to the Gulch and build. I'm not going to live back in my little cabin, although I could if I had to and all that, but I'd like to build a house in a better location, and and build it for real. We didn't know what we were doing. I mean, if it wasn't for some of the guys at Whitethorn Construction, we had the basics, but we certainly, even though I was delving into architecture and stuff like that, I had, there was a lot of things I didn't know. So, by the grace of God, 50 plus years later, my house is still standing. This funky cabin we built in the woods back then is still standing, from a few upgrades here and there and whatnot. But, a lot of my neighbors have built their little McMansions or whatever, and, we're still little quaint stewards of the land there. We don't have a bunch of big greenhouses or anything like that. It's pretty much how it's always been. But after my second husband died, I don't know, it's sort of, that dream, it's not gone, but also it's kind of like, that's a lot of work, and you're everything out there. You're the municipal district. You got to take care of the road, the power and everything, and got a little used to some of the cushier things, like not having to get up and go fix the water first thing in the morning when troubleshoot what's going on and stuff like that. And even though I have some really great people living there and they'd help me do anything, it's kind of not the same as sharing that dream with, your partner or something like that. So after he died, I don't know, I think I'm just kind of like still, in some ways, still mourning all that was left. And then when my dad died, about 10, not quite 10 years later, and, as my sisters, and we have a stepsister and a stepbrother. They're both back east, but, I call it we become the now generation and whatnot. And I sort of don't have any plans for it, so I'm sort of just going through the motions and still, like I say, I feel like extremely lucky with what I've ended up with. You know, I own my own home and have plenty to do, too much to do in my art, and a really great, you know, just the people here that are, you know, the friends and support system and stuff like that. It's a you know, the family that we chose, not the one that we were born with, kind of. Especially, and it's interesting how those people that we first started out with, like in 1970 or whatnot, it was like sort of, that's always like your little, our little core, you know, there'll always be that really special connection, you know, and then there's all the, it's sort of like an onion, all the layers that you've added to the people that have moved to the neighborhood or that you've met in your other jobs, or, you know, because one of the things, like you say, you know, one of the things you're doing is like how people got here and different things like that. But it's also like the different neighborhoods that I didn't really pay attention to when I first moved here. Like after a few years when my neighbors first moved into the Gulch, then a lot of them got real friendly with the people in Edisburg. And even though I knew some people living out there and they were part of that like Whitethorn crowd, or like when we were having the trade fair and whatnot, and we knew them, you know, it's like, oh, it brought a few more people in. And then for a while, then I, mid-70s or something like that, I met Maggie. Well, I actually met John Carey first, her husband, before she was with Joe. And I was like, Maggie kind of, she was like one of the only few people, I think, and I didn't realize this at the time, but she was kind of like, oh my God, she's talking about my sister and I, who my sister's 2.5 years younger, and I was like, oh my God, these kids are out here all by themselves, sort of, you know, and we were, you know, but it just didn't, I don't know, it didn't seem as dangerous. I don't even want to call it dangerous. I don't know what, you know, now it seems a little more tenuous maybe, and constantly meet kids that are 15 years old and whatnot, and it's like, how many of them could really, I mean, to move out there when I was 15, it took me a long time. It wasn't until after my mom died, which was 1994, that I kind of realized one of the, I think the ideas that appealed to me about that was that after moving from Albuquerque to Berkeley, I was on social overload, I think it was, to a certain extent, you know? I mean, it was hard. It was, you know, but at that time, I don't know that we realized how hard it was. It was actually, though, because we, you know, we were living in this great house. There was all this great stuff going on around us. We still had, you know, we had friends that had been our friends in New Mexico, but then there was a whole, you know, another crowd too. And it was pretty cohesive from here to there, but I think it was just everything sort of cumulative that, you know, sort of drove me out of the city to, you know, and that exposure to Whale Gulch, which was very, very rural, and, you know, was, because we lived in Albuquerque, but like the guy who became my stepdad when we moved to Berkeley, he lived outside the city. First he lived on the east side, which my sister eventually ended up living out there. My older sister ended up living out there after a while, and then he also had a place on the west side on the Rio Grande, and there was a whole crowd out there that was like our extended family. So we spent a lot of time outside of the city, but I don't know what it was that grabbed my attention so much about Whale Gulch and looking at that as some kind of salvation. It really, to this day, I have no idea what the, you know, empower. And I don't know what I would have done. You know, what would have happened to my life if my dad and my mom hadn't decided that, sure, you can go out there and build a cabin. Yeah, so, and then it worked out pretty well. Pretty interesting life, that's what I mean. But sometimes I wake up and think, what if you had been a high school graduate and you'd gone off to college and, you know, sort of like your parents' great white hope or something like that for a professional life or something, because it's, you know, I had a lot of interest, but, you know, they went by the wayside. I would think it was just the timing of, and, you know, not being, you know, our parents not constraining us in that way. that that's what you had to do. And maybe because they just felt like that really hadn't been the best life for them. I don't know.